let's explore both tax incidence and what happens in terms of surplus and deadweight loss in two extreme cases. The case of a perfectly inelastic demand and the case of a perfectly elastic demand. So here's a case of a perfectly inelastic demand. Consumers, at least in a certain range of prices, always want to purchase 500 units of soda. Of course, if the price goes high enough, presumably they'll give up. So if the price of soda was $5 million per bottle, no one would buy soda. But at least in a reasonable region that we're talking about, demand is perfectly inelastic. That means that if the price goes up, consumers will not change their behavior. It might be because consumers do not see a substitute to soda. They're not prepared to switch from soda to water. As far as they're concerned, there is no substitute to this wonderful thing called Coca-Cola or Sprite. In that case, when the government comes in and sets a per unit tax, and again, the supply curve shifts up by the amount of the tax, what we get is that consumers who are still insisting on purchasing 500 units will bear the full burden of the tax. The price to them will go up by the full amount of the tax, by the full $1, and go up from $2 to $3. As a result, what happens is that consumer surplus drops. Instead of being this whole area, it's just the upper area. And producer surplus in this case does not change at all. So let's find the consumer surplus and producer surplus after the tax. The producer surplus is what it was before. It is the area underneath the price minus the tax, or $2, and above the supply curve. So this is the producer surplus. And the consumer surplus is the area underneath the demand curve and above the new price. So again, this is the consumer surplus, and this is the producer surplus. So producer surplus shrank, consumer surplus did not change. What about the total surplus? What happened to this area here? Is it lost? Of course not. We have the government, and the government is collecting $1 for every bottle of soda, and this area is tax revenue. We get that with a perfectly inelastic demand, two results. The first is that all the burden of the tax falls on the consumer, so that the tax incidence is completely on the consumer side. And the second result that we get is that there's no deadweight loss. And again, there's no deadweight loss because we haven't changed the quantity that's produced. Again, the metaphor of the mountain or the hill, the original quantity was the top of the mountain, and we haven't shifted from this original quantity. And by not shifting, we're still at the top of the hill. Therefore, there's no deadweight loss. Let's do the second diagram. In the second diagram, we have a demand that's completely elastic. That means that if price changes, even by a little bit, consumers will shift away from soda and get another drink. That means there's a perfect substitute. This would correlate to someone saying, well, I want a drink, but I don't care what I drink. I can drink soda or I can drink water. And if the price of soda goes up, I will immediately switch to another beverage. In that situation, what happens is that if we have a tax, which again shifts the supply curve up by $1, the amount of the tax, the price to the consumers cannot change. Because if the price changes even by 1 cent, all the consumers will shift away from this product and buy something else. The result is that we have a change in quantity, but we do not have a change in price. The quantity will drop, maybe from 500 to 400, but the price, as far as the consumer is concerned, stays at $2. What about the producers? Well, of course, someone has to suffer. And in this particular case, the person who suffers is the producers. What they get to pocket is $1. The price to them has dropped by the full amount of the tax. What about deadweight loss? Do we get deadweight loss? Absolutely. we know that the original supply curve reflects the marginal cost, and we know that the original demand curve reflects the marginal benefit. And so the deadweight loss is the difference between marginal cost and marginal benefit between the original point, which was the top of the hill, and the new point, which is where we are now. And if you look at, for this triangle, here it is. This is the triangle that represents deadweight loss. So in the case of a perfectly elastic demand, we have two results. The first result is in terms of tax incidence, where we see that the full burden of the tax falls on the producers. And the second thing that we find is that we have deadweight loss because we have a change in quantity. So we've moved from the top of the hill, we must be moving downhill, we must be creating deadweight loss. So we've done two cases, the case of a perfectly inelastic demand and the case of a perfectly elastic demand. Let's try doing two more cases in terms of a perfectly inelastic supply and a perfectly elastic supply.